Can $5 change someone's life? Today we're going to explore how a single act of kindness created a ripple effect that transformed not just one life, but thousands. The streets of Oak Ridge were lined with old, crumbling buildings, their faded paint and cracked windows a silent testimony to the struggles of the people who lived there. It was a place where dreams often died young, swallowed by the weight of hardship and endless struggle. But among the many faces in this forgotten neighborhood, there was one boy whose eyes burned with a quiet fire, a fire fueled by hope, by hunger, and by something even stronger than desperation, a dream. Malik was only 10 years old, but he had already learned that life was not fair. He lived in a tiny apartment with his mother and younger brother sharing a single bedroom, their nights filled with the distant hum of the city and the occasional scurry of rats in the walls. His mother, a hard-working woman with tired eyes and calloused hands, worked multiple jobs, cleaning houses during the day, waiting tables at night, just to keep food on the table. She barely had time to rest, much less spend time with her boys, but Malik understood. She was doing everything she could for them, sacrificing, so they might have a better future. Despite their struggles, Malik was different from most kids in his neighborhood. While others found solace in basketball or video games, Malik had a passion that set him apart: books. Every day after school, he would walk past Wilson's bookstore, pressing his face against the glass, eyes roaming hungrily over the shelves filled with stories, knowledge, and adventures. The smell of old pages and fresh ink called to him, but books were a luxury his family simply couldn't afford. He would stand outside for what felt like hours, staring at the covers, imagining the worlds hidden inside those pages. He wanted to read about inventors, scientists, and entrepreneurs, people who had built something out of nothing, people who had escaped poverty just like he dreamed of doing. But dreams alone weren't enough. He had no way of making them come true. His school library had some books, but they were limited. He had already read the few biographies available, and he craved more. The thought of owning a book, flipping through its pages whenever he wanted, was an idea so distant it felt impossible. And yet he never stopped hoping. At Malik's school, there was one person who noticed him more than the others: Uncle David, the school's security guard. Uncle David was a tall, broad-shouldered man with gray at his temples and deep laugh lines around his eyes. Though his uniform was worn and his boots scuffed, he carried himself with a quiet dignity. He had been working at the school for years, standing by the front gates, watching over the children as they arrived and left each day. For most students, Uncle David was just part of the background, someone they barely noticed. But for Malik, he was something more. Uncle David was one of the few people who took the time to talk to him. "Morning, young man," he would say with a warm smile, tipping his cap as Malik walked past. Sometimes, when he saw the boy deep in thought, he would ask, "What's on your mind today, Malik?" And Malik would hesitate, then tell him about the book he wanted to read, the dream he had last night about becoming an inventor, or the things he had learned from the library. Uncle David always listened, nodding thoughtfully, his face lighting up with interest. Unbeknownst to most, Uncle David had once been like Malik, a boy with big dreams and no way to chase them. Years ago, when he was young, he had wanted to go to college, to become a teacher or maybe even an engineer. But life had other plans. His family was poor, and when his father fell sick, David had to quit school to work. His dreams faded as reality took over, and before he knew it, he had spent his whole life doing small jobs just to survive. But he never stopped believing that education was the key to a better future, and whenever he saw a child eager to learn, it stirred something deep inside him. A hope that maybe, just maybe, he could help one kid escape the cycle that had trapped him. He saw that same hunger in Malik, and it made him pay closer attention. One afternoon, as the sun cast long golden streaks across the pavement, Uncle David noticed Malik standing outside Wilson's bookstore again. But today there was something different. He wasn't just looking, he was staring. His eyes were locked onto a particular book in the display window. a thick hardcover titled The Road to Greatness, Stories of the World's Most Successful People. His small fingers clenched into fists at his sides, his jaw set with an expression far too determined for a 10-year-old. Uncle David watched for a moment before walking over. "What's got you so mesmerized today, kid?" he asked, his deep voice warm with curiosity. Malik startled, then looked up, embarrassed. He hesitated before mumbling, "That book, I want it." Uncle David followed his gaze. The book was expensive, more than a meal at a diner, more than Malik could ever afford. "You really want that one, huh?" Malik nodded, his expression serious beyond his years. "It's about people who made it big, people who started with nothing. I want to know how they did it." Something in the boy's voice struck Uncle David, a deep, unshakable longing that echoed his own forgotten dreams. The security guard stood silent for a moment as memories washed over him like waves. He thought about his own childhood, the dreams he had been forced to abandon, the books he had once yearned for but couldn't afford, and the opportunities that had slipped through his fingers. And suddenly he felt something stir inside him, a chance to right an old wrong, to change a story that hadn't yet been written. Maybe he couldn't rewrite his own past, but he could do something, no matter how small, to help shape this boy's future. Uncle David reached into his pocket and pulled out his worn leather wallet. The leather was cracked from years of use, the edges frayed. Inside was a crumpled $5 bill, his lunch money for tomorrow. It wasn't much. To some, it was nothing, but to Malik, it could be everything. Uncle David unfolded the bill, smoothed out its wrinkles, and held it out to the boy. "Here," he said simply, "go buy your book." Malik's eyes widened. His lips parted in shock. I can't take this, Uncle David," he stammered, his small hands clenched at his sides. "That's your money." Uncle David chuckled, the sound warm and reassuring. "And I'm giving it to you, because I believe in you, kid. I believe that one day you're going to do something great." His expression grew serious. "Just promise me one thing." Malik swallowed hard, nodding. "Anything." Uncle David crouched down to his level, his eyes meeting the boy's. When he spoke, his voice was filled with quiet sincerity that seemed to make the busy street around them fall silent. "Use this to learn. Become the best person you can be. And one day, if you ever get the chance, help someone else, like I'm helping you today." Malik's hands trembled as he took the money. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure Uncle David could hear it. It was more than just a bill. It was a gift of faith, the first time someone outside his family had believed in him. Without another word, he turned and rushed into the store, and in that moment his life began to change. The sun was beginning to set over the city, casting a warm orange glow on the streets. The air was thick with the scent of food from nearby vendors, mingling with the distant laughter of children playing in the alleys. But for Malik, the world outside faded into the background as he stood frozen in front of Wilson's bookstore. His fingers gripped the $5 bill tightly, the edges slightly crumpled from where he had held it too long. Uncle David's words echoed in his mind like a mantra. "Use this to learn, become the best person you can be, and one day, if you ever get the chance, help someone else, like I'm helping you today." It wasn't just money, it was a gift of belief. For the past year, he had walked past this bookstore, longing for the very book that now sat on the display shelf. The Road to Greatness, Stories of the World's Most Successful People. The cover was glossy, the title embossed in bold gold letters reflecting the setting sun. He had dreamed about reading it, imagined what secrets it might hold. The lessons, the journeys of people who had started with nothing but turned their lives into something extraordinary. And now he had the chance to own it. Summoning his courage, Malik pushed open the heavy glass door, a small bell jingling above his head. The store smelled of paper, ink, and old wood. Shelves towered over him, filled with books that whispered stories of adventures, wisdom, and possibilities. He had never stepped inside before, not because he didn't want to, but because he knew he couldn't afford anything. Today was different. Timidly, he walked up to the counter where Mr. Wilson, the store owner, was arranging a new shipment of books. Mr. Wilson was an older man with kind eyes, his silver-rimmed glasses sliding down his nose as he glanced over the counter. "Well, well," he said, a smile of recognition spreading across his face. "Finally decided to come inside, huh?" Malik nodded, swallowing his nerves. I want to buy a book." He pointed toward the display window. "That one." Mary Wilson followed his gaze, his eyebrows rising slightly. "Ah, The Road to Greatness. Good choice, kid." He reached for the book and placed it gently on the counter. "That'll be $12.99. Malik's heart sank like a stone. He slowly unfolded the $5 bill in his hand, staring at it as if he could will it to multiply. It wasn't enough. Not even half. His throat tightened. After all this, was he still going to walk away empty-handed? Mr. Wilson must have seen the disappointment in his face. He looked at the boy, then at the money, and something softened in his expression. His eyes lingered on the carefully smoothed-out bill, clearly treasured. "You really want this book, don't you?" he asked quietly. Malik nodded. "More than anything." There was a long pause. Then, with a small sigh, Mr. Wilson smiled. "How about this?" he said, flipping the book open. "You give me your $5, and you promise me something. You finish this book and come back to tell me what you learned. Deal?" Malik's eyes widened. "You mean I can really have it?" Mr. Wilson winked. Knowledge should never be out of reach for those who seek it. With trembling hands, Malik slid the money across the counter, watching as Mr. Wilson bagged the book carefully like it was something precious. And to Malik, it was. As he stepped out of the store, the book tucked safely under his arm, he felt something different inside him, a spark, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something greater. Uncle David was still standing by the school gates when Malik ran up to him, breathless with excitement. "I got it," Malik exclaimed, holding up the bag like a trophy. "I got the book." Uncle David grinned, ruffling the boy's hair. "That's what I like to see," he said. "Now, what's the plan?" "The plan?" Malik echoed, confused. "You think just having the book will change your life?" Uncle David chuckled. "No, kid, it's what you do with it that matters." Malik clutched the book to his chest, nodding seriously. "I'll read every page," he promised. "I'll learn everything I can." Uncle David knelt beside him, his voice gentle but firm. "And remember what I told you, Malik. Someday you'll be in my shoes. Someone else will need a little help, a little encouragement. When that day comes, you know what to do." Malik didn't know why, but his throat felt tight. He nodded. "I promise." That night Malik couldn't sleep. He lay on the thin mattress he shared with his brother, using the dim glow of a street lamp outside to read the first chapter, and as he read, his world changed. The book was filled with stories of people who had started from nothing, just like him. People who had faced poverty, rejection, failure. But they had something in common. They never gave up. Page after page, Malik's mind raced with possibilities. For the first time, he felt like he had a roadmap. The book talked about habits, discipline, education, and determination. It talked about taking action, even in small steps. And suddenly the impossible didn't seem so impossible anymore. The next day he went to the library and borrowed another book, then another and another. At first it was just curiosity, but soon it became a hunger to learn, to understand, to change his future. Weeks passed, then months. Malik didn't just read, he applied what he learned. He started asking better questions in school, working harder on assignments. He found ways to help his mother with small jobs using the principles he learned about money management. He even started telling other kids at school about the books he was reading, encouraging them to read too. And all of it, every single thing, had started because of a $5 bill and a simple act of kindness. One afternoon, as Malik passed through the school gates, Uncle David called out to him, "How's that book treating you?" Malik smiled, holding up a notebook filled with notes. "Changed my life," he said. Uncle David chuckled, nodding in satisfaction. "Told you, didn't I?" Malik looked at the man who had believed in him when no one else had, and he made a silent vow he would keep his promise. One day, when the time was right, he would pass it forward, because if one small act of kindness could change his life, who's to say it couldn't change another? The first night Malik held The Road to Greatness, he barely slept. He flipped through its pages under the dim glow of the street lamp outside his window, his small hands tracing the words that spoke of struggle, perseverance, and triumph. The stories in the book felt like echoes of his own life. People who had started from nothing, just like him, but had worked their way to the top. They had faced hardships, rejections, and setbacks, yet they had refused to give up. For the first time, Malik felt something shift deep inside him. He had always dreamed of escaping poverty, of becoming someone important. But before this book, his dream had been just that, a dream. Now, for the first time, he saw a roadmap. This book would not just be something he read, it would be something he lived. From that night forward, Malik's routine changed. Every day after school, instead of going home right away, he rushed to the local library. He wasn't there just to pass time. He was on a mission. With his notebook in hand, he devoured books about entrepreneurship, business strategies, and self-improvement. The more he read, the more he learned. The more he learned, the more he wanted to know. He realized something powerful. Success wasn't just about talent, it was about knowledge and action. He started studying how businesses worked, how money was managed, and how successful people thought differently. And he wasn't just reading, he was applying. Malik started saving whatever little money he could find. When his mother left spare change on the table, he put it aside. When neighbors needed small errands done, he volunteered, collecting quarters and dimes. He learned the value of every cent. At school, his teachers noticed the change. He was no longer just another quiet boy in the back of the classroom. He asked more questions, he paid more attention, he worked harder than ever before. And all of it had started with that one book. But life didn't make things easy. Despite his new hunger for knowledge, Malik still lived in a world where survival came first. His mother worked endlessly, but there were still nights when their cabinets were nearly empty. There were days when the power went out because the bill hadn't been paid. His younger brother needed new shoes, but money was too tight. Sometimes it felt like no amount of knowledge could change their reality. There were days when Malik came home exhausted from school, his stomach aching from hunger. Days when he opened a book only to find himself too tired to read. But in those moments, he reminded himself of something Uncle David had said. "It's not about how tough life is, kid. It's about what you do when life gets tough." So Malik kept pushing forward. When his mother picked up extra shifts, leaving him in charge of his little brother, Malik read to him at night, telling him stories about the great men and women he was learning about. When he felt overwhelmed, he reminded himself why he started. He wasn't just reading to escape. He was reading to build a future. And that meant, no matter how hard things got, he couldn't stop now. As Malik read more books, he started noticing something interesting. Opportunities were everywhere. One day at school, he overheard some classmates talking about how their parents paid them for doing small chores. It gave him an idea. That weekend, he printed out small handwritten flyers and started offering lawn mowing and car washing services to neighbors. At first, only a few people hired him. But Malik had learned something important from his books. Good work speaks for itself. After a few weeks of hard work, his small business grew. People recommended him to their friends. He started making real money, not much, but enough to buy more books, help his mother, and even start saving for the future. For the first time, he felt like he had control over his life. He wasn't just dreaming about success anymore. He was creating it. But success didn't come without obstacles. One day, after weeks of working hard, Malik came home to find his mother sitting at the kitchen table, holding an eviction notice. The rent had gone up. They had 2 weeks to leave. Malik felt his world crashing down. All his hard work, all his dreams, none of it could stop this from happening. For the first time in months, doubt crept in. Maybe no matter how hard he tried, he would never escape this life. That night he sat in his room, staring at his notebook filled with ideas and plans. Then he thought of Uncle David. He thought of the book that had changed his life. And he realized something. Failure was not the end. If the people in those books had found a way to rise from nothing, so could he. Malik refused to let this moment define him. Instead of giving up, he worked harder. He expanded his services, offering to clean garages and take out trash for extra pay. He went to school early and stayed late, using every free moment to plan his next step. And in the end, his mother found a new, smaller apartment before they lost everything. It wasn't easy. But Malik had learned one of the most important lessons of success. Obstacles are not the end. They are just stepping stones. As the years passed, Malik's hunger for knowledge never faded. He continued working, reading, and pushing himself. By the time he was in high school, he had started his first real business, a tutoring service for younger students. He realized that many kids struggled in school because they didn't have someone to guide them. So he became that person. His tutoring business grew fast. Teachers noticed. Parents were impressed. Soon he was making more money than he ever imagined. And when it was time for college, all the hard work paid off. Malik received a full scholarship to one of the top universities in the country. That day, as he held the acceptance letter in his hands, he thought of Uncle David. He thought of that $5 bill. And he knew this was just the beginning. Before Malik left for college, he visited Uncle David at the school gates. The old security guard smiled as soon as he saw him. "Something tells me you've got news for me." Malik grinned. "I got the scholarship." Uncle David's eyes gleamed with pride. "Knew you would." Malik hesitated for a moment, then reached into his pocket. He pulled out a $5 bill. "This is for you," Malik said, pressing it into Uncle David's palm. Uncle David frowned. "What's this?" Malik's voice was steady. "A promise fulfilled." Uncle David looked down at the bill, then back at Malik, and for the first time the old man's eyes filled with tears. Malik had kept his word. But more than that, he was ready to change the world. The years passed swiftly, each one carving its own story into the fabric of Malik's life. From the boy who once stood outside a bookstore with longing eyes, he had transformed into something unimaginable. A billionaire entrepreneur, a man who had built his empire from the ground up. His technology company, one that started from his college dorm room with nothing but a laptop and an unshakable dream, had grown into a global powerhouse. He had defied every statistic, broken every barrier, and risen far beyond what anyone had expected. But no matter how much success he achieved, Malik never forgot where he came from. And more importantly, he never forgot the man who believed in him before the world did. One crisp autumn morning, Malik sat in a sleek, high-rise office, dressed in a tailored suit, preparing for a televised interview. Across from him sat the reporter, a woman with sharp eyes and a warm smile. "So, Malik," she began, flipping through her notes, "the world knows you as the billionaire entrepreneur, the self-made man. But what they don't know is, who inspired you? Who gave you your first break?" Malik's lips curved into a small, nostalgic smile. "I was 10 years old," he said, his voice carrying a quiet reverence. "I had no money, no resources, just a dream and a hunger to learn. But there was one man, a school security guard named Uncle David." The interviewer leaned forward, intrigued. "A security guard?" Malik nodded. "He gave me $5. To most, that wouldn't mean much. But to me, it was everything. That money bought me the first book that changed my life. It gave me my first real lesson in generosity, in the power of believing in someone." The reporter's expression softened. "And have you spoken to him since?" Malik exhaled slowly, a flicker of regret in his eyes. "No, he admitted. Life moved fast. I got caught up in work, in building my company and chasing my dreams, but I never forgot him. He paused, then looked directly into the camera. And now? It's time to find him. The interview aired that night, and the story spread like wildfire. Social media exploded with people trying to track down the mysterious security guard who had unknowingly played a role in shaping one of the most successful men in the world. But Malik didn't wait for the internet to do the work for him. He made phone calls. He reached out to old teachers, school administrators, anyone who might have known where Uncle David had gone after retiring. Days turned into weeks, but Malik refused to give up. Then finally a breakthrough. An old colleague from the school called him. "I know where he is," the man said. "He retired years ago. He lives in a small house just outside the city. But, Malik, I should warn you, life hasn't been kind to him." Malik's heart clenched. "Where is he?" The house was small, worn down by time and neglect. The paint was peeling, the porch creaked underfoot, and the front yard was overgrown. Malik stood at the gate, dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, his heart pounding as he knocked on the door. A few moments later, the door creaked open, and there he was, Uncle David. But he looked different, older. His once strong frame had shrunk slightly, his face lined with the weight of years. His eyes, however, still held that same warmth, the same quiet wisdom that had once reassured a lost 10-year-old boy. Uncle David squinted at Malik, confused. "Can I help you?" Malik swallowed the lump in his throat. "It's me," he said softly. "Malik." There was a long pause. Then realization dawned in Uncle David's eyes. The breath hitched in his throat, and for the first time in his life, Malik saw the old man's hands tremble. "Malik?" His voice cracked. "The little boy from the school?" Tears burned behind Malik's eyes as he nodded. "Yeah, the little boy who you believed in when no one else did." Before Uncle David could respond, Malik wrapped him in a hug. The old man's shoulders shook, his arms tightening around Malik as a choked sob escaped him. "I always knew you'd do something great," Uncle David whispered. "I just never thought you'd remember me." Malik pulled back, looking him straight in the eyes. "I never forgot. And now, it's my turn to help you." Uncle David didn't understand at first. He didn't understand why Malik had come back, why there were trucks outside his house, why contractors were measuring his front porch. And then it hit him. Malik was renovating his home, not just fixing the paint or patching the leaks, rebuilding it from the ground up. A brand new house, fully furnished, fully stocked, fully... Tears streamed down Uncle David's face as he shook his head. "Malik, I don't deserve this." "Yes, you do," Malik said firmly. "You changed my life. Now let me change yours." And that wasn't all. Malik hired a full-time caretaker to ensure Uncle David never had to worry about meals or medical care again. He set up an account in his name, ensuring he would never struggle financially. Most importantly, he made sure that Uncle David would never be forgotten. But Malik didn't stop there. The story of Uncle David had touched millions, so, in honor of the man who had once given him $5, Malik founded the David Foundation, a scholarship fund dedicated to helping underprivileged kids just like Malik once was, gain access to books, education, and opportunities. Thousands of books were donated to schools, libraries were built, and scholarships were given out to bright young minds who just needed someone to believe in them. At the grand opening of the foundation, Malik stood in front of a crowd, Uncle David seated beside him, watching with quiet pride. "This foundation exists," Malik said, his voice strong, "because one man chose to believe in a child when no one else did. He gave me $5, but it was never about the money. It was about faith. It was about kindness. It was about hope." He turned to Uncle David. "And now, because of you, millions of kids will have that same hope." The crowd erupted in applause. Uncle David wiped his tears, shaking his head in disbelief. "I never wanted anything in return, Malik. I just wanted to see you succeed." Malik smiled. "And because of you, I did." That evening, after the event, Malik and Uncle David sat on the porch of his brand-new home, watching the sun set. "You know," Uncle David mused, rocking back in his chair, "I always knew you'd make it, but I never thought you'd come back for an old man like me." Malik squeezed his shoulder. "I came back because you're the reason I made it. You taught me that success isn't about what you get, it's about what you give." Uncle David sighed, content. "And now look at you, a billionaire, changing lives." Malik chuckled. "All because of $5. Uncle David smiled. $5. And a little bit of faith. And as they sat there, side by side, the world finally felt right. The boy who had been given a chance had returned to give back, and in the end, that was the greatest success of all. Malik sat on the porch of Uncle David's newly renovated house, staring at the vibrant sunset that painted the sky in hues of orange and gold. Just a few weeks ago, this home had been falling apart, much like the world around the man who once saved him. Now it was a place of warmth, safety, and dignity, a place Uncle David truly deserved. The old man rocked gently in his chair, shaking his head in disbelief. "This is too much, Malik. I never expected—" Malik reached over, squeezing his hand. "You once told me something, Uncle David, that if I ever got the chance, I should help someone the way you helped me. Well, this is my chance." Uncle David's eyes welled up with tears, but he said nothing. He didn't need to. For the first time in years, he felt seen. He felt valued. He felt like his small act of kindness had mattered. But Malik wasn't done yet. His mission wasn't just about repaying one man. It was about spreading kindness on a larger scale. The $5 bill Uncle David had given him had changed his life forever. Now Malik wanted to multiply that kindness and give other kids the same chance he had been given. Within months, the David Foundation was born. The goal? To ensure that no child with a hunger for knowledge would ever have to stand outside a bookstore longing for something they couldn't afford. The foundation launched with 3 core programs. The Book Grant Program. Thousands of underprivileged children received free books, ensuring they had access to the knowledge that could change their lives. The Scholarship Fund. Full scholarships were provided for promising students who lacked the financial means to pursue higher education, and the Mentorship Initiative. A network of successful professionals volunteered to mentor young students, guiding them on their journey towards success. At the Foundation's inaugural event, Malik stood on a grand stage, hundreds of students and families watching with eager anticipation. He took a deep breath, scanning the faces in the crowd. "This foundation," he began, "is not just about books or scholarships. It's about belief. Because I know what it feels like to have a dream but no way to chase it. I know what it's like to feel invisible." He turned to Uncle David, who sat in the front row, wiping tears from his eyes. "But I also know what it feels like to have someone believe in you." The audience erupted in applause. Uncle David had never imagined his name would one day be attached to something so powerful, and for the first time in his life, he truly understood the impact of his kindness. Malik knew his journey had started at one place, his old school, and now he was going to make sure no student there was ever overlooked again. The first initiative, a brand new library. At the groundbreaking ceremony, students and teachers gathered, watching as construction crews laid the foundation for what would soon become the David Library, a space filled with thousands of books, computers, and learning resources. The principal, who had once watched Malik struggle as a young boy, wiped away tears as she took the microphone. "I remember a time when Malik sat in the back of my classroom, quiet and determined," she said. "Now, he's ensuring that every student who walks through these doors has the resources they need to succeed." The students erupted in cheers. But for Malik, the real victory was when he saw a group of kids pressing their faces against the glass, peering inside just like he once had at the bookstore. Only this time, they didn't have to dream about stepping inside, because the doors would always be open for them. The ripple effect of Malik's generosity spread far beyond what he had imagined. As his story gained national attention, other successful individuals were inspired to take action. Business leaders, celebrities, and everyday people started donating to educational causes, creating their own scholarship programs and mentoring young students. One small act of kindness had ignited a movement, and Malik made sure to remind everyone where it all began. During a televised speech at a national education conference, he held up a framed $5 bill. "This," he said, "is the most valuable money I have ever received. It is not worth millions. It is worth more than that, because it represents hope." The audience gave him a standing ovation. Uncle David's $5 bill had now changed thousands of lives. One evening, Malik and Uncle David sat on the porch of the new home, watching the fireflies flicker in the twilight. "You know," Uncle David mused, "I never thought I'd live to see something like this. All I did was give a boy $5. Malik turned to him, his expression serious. "No," he said, "you gave me more than that. You gave me belief. You gave me a chance." Uncle David chuckled, shaking his head. "I was just doing what felt right." Malik smiled. "And that's the point. Doing what's right, even when it's small, can change everything." Uncle David exhaled, his face peaceful. "You've done something incredible, Malik. But tell me, are you happy?" Malik hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I am." Uncle David grinned. "Then that's all that matters." Malik's journey didn't just inspire businesses and schools. It touched the hearts of everyday people. Social media was flooded with stories of strangers paying for someone's groceries, students helping their peers, and small acts of kindness performed in Uncle David's name. News outlets called it the David effect. The hashtag #BeSomeone'sUncleDavid trended worldwide, encouraging people to pay forward the kindness they had once received. And just like that, a single act of generosity turned into a global movement. Years passed, and Malik continued to expand the foundation, reaching even more children in need. But no matter how far he went, he always made time for Uncle David. The old man grew frail, his hair turning fully gray, but he remained sharp, witty, and endlessly proud of Malik. And then, one day, Malik got the call. Uncle David had passed away in his sleep. The world mourned the loss of a man who had unknowingly changed thousands of lives. At the funeral, Malik stood before a sea of people, students, teachers, business leaders, and strangers who had been touched by his story. "I once made a promise," he said, "that if I ever got the chance, I would help someone the way Uncle David helped me. Today, I want all of you to make the same promise." He looked over the crowd. "Because if a single $5 bill can change the world, imagine what we can do together." Years later, when people asked Malik about his greatest accomplishment, was it his billion-dollar company, his foundation, the books and documentaries about his life? His answer was always the same. "My greatest accomplishment," he would say, "was keeping a promise to a man who believed in me." And at the center of his office, framed in gold, hung the $5 bill that started it all. Not as a reminder of where he had come from, but as proof of what one act of kindness can do. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of deep amber and violet. The air was cool, carrying with it the soft rustling of leaves. Malik sat beside Uncle David on the porch of his newly rebuilt home, the place that now stood as a symbol of kindness repaid. For a while they just sat there, enjoying the silence, the kind that only exists between two people who share a deep understanding. Finally, Uncle David exhaled, shifting slightly in his chair. His hands, weathered with age, rested on the armrests. His voice was softer now, filled with a quiet sense of peace. "I always knew you'd do something, Malik," he murmured, "but I never expected all this." Malik turned to look at him, a faint smile touching his lips. "You didn't expect me to become a billionaire?" he teased. Uncle David chuckled, shaking his head. "No," he said. "I didn't expect you to come back." His gaze softened. "Most people don't." Malik swallowed hard. He knew what Uncle David meant. Success had a way of making people forget. forget where they came from, forget who had helped them along the way. But not Malik. "I had to come back," he said firmly, "because if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here." Uncle David's eyes twinkled with something between pride and gratitude. He looked down at his hands for a long moment before speaking again. "You did good, kid," he finally said. "Real good." Malik felt a lump rise in his throat. Coming from anyone else, those words might not have meant much, but coming from Uncle David, they meant everything. News of Malik's return had spread far beyond their small town. His story, the little boy who had once stood outside a bookstore with empty pockets, the security guard who had given him $5, and the billionaire who had returned to repay the debt, had become a symbol of hope. Newspapers ran headlines, "A small act of kindness that changed the world." From $5 to a billion-dollar empire, the power of paying it forward. Meet the man who inspired the world's most influential entrepreneur. Social media was flooded with stories of people paying forward small acts of kindness. Random strangers left $5 bills in bookstores with notes that read, "To the next dreamer, may this be your first step." The ripple effect was undeniable. Uncle David had never sought recognition, but now his name had become synonymous with the idea that one moment of kindness can change the course of someone's life. Months passed, then years. Malik and Uncle David continued to share evenings on the porch, swapping stories and memories. But time, as always, was relentless. Uncle David grew weaker, his movements slower, his voice quieter. And then one morning Malik got the call he had been dreading. Uncle David had passed away peacefully in his sleep. The news sent a wave of grief through Malik's heart. But he also felt something else, a deep, unshakable gratitude. Gratitude that he had found him, gratitude that he had been able to give back, gratitude that he had fulfilled his promise. Uncle David had not died alone, he had not been forgotten, his kindness had outlived him. The funeral was unlike anything their small town had ever seen. People from across the country came, business leaders, celebrities, students, and strangers who had been touched by Malik's story. The man who had once been a simple school security guard was now a legend. Malik stood at the podium facing the hundreds of people who had gathered to honor Uncle David's life. His voice was steady, but his heart ached. "When I was 10 years old," he began, "I was a kid with big dreams, but no way to chase them. I was standing outside a bookstore wishing for something I couldn't afford, and then a man with a kind heart and $5 to spare, changed everything." He paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. "Uncle David didn't just give me money, he gave me belief. He made me feel like I mattered, like my dreams were worth something, and that one moment set off a chain reaction that led me here today." Malik exhaled slowly, glancing down at the small, framed object he held in his hands. "This," he said, lifting the frame for everyone to see, "is the $5 bill he gave me that day." A murmur swept through the crowd. "I framed it to remind myself that success isn't about what you achieve, it's about what you give. It's about lifting others the way someone once lifted you." He looked up, his voice strong. "So today, I ask all of you to do the same, in honor of Uncle David, in honor of kindness, in honor of believing in someone who just needs a little help. Pay it forward." Tears glistened in the eyes of many, and in that moment Malik knew Uncle David's legacy would never die. That evening, Malik returned to the porch where he and Uncle David had spent so many nights. The chair beside him was empty, but he still felt his presence. He reached into his pocket and pulled out another $5 bill. This time, he didn't keep it. Instead, he walked into town, looking for someone who reminded him of himself all those years ago. And when he found a young boy staring longingly into the window of a bookstore, Malik smiled, walked up to him and pressed the bill into his small hand. "What's your dream, kid?" he asked. The boy's eyes widened. I want to be an engineer." Malik nodded. "Then start here, get a book, learn, and one day when you get the chance, help someone else, just like I'm helping you today." The boy's face lit up with wonder, clutching the bill tightly, and as Malik walked away, he knew the cycle had begun again. Because kindness never dies, it only grows. Years later, when people asked Malik about his greatest accomplishment, he never mentioned his billions, his company, or his success. Instead, he would smile and say, "My greatest accomplishment was keeping a promise to a man who believed in me." Because in the end, it wasn't wealth or fame that defined him. It was the small, seemingly insignificant moment that changed everything. It was the $5 that became priceless. It was the belief that kindness, no matter how small, can change the world. And as long as people continued to pay it forward, Uncle David's legacy would live on forever. If this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life. Let's keep spreading positivity. Together, we can make a difference.